Donald Trump says we will be leaving very soon. I'm Anya Coopers-McKinnon. Thanks so much for joining us on this live stream, all about the Iran war. So the question is, could the Iran war be coming to an end? So the US president is suggesting that, deal or no deal, the US will end its involvement in the Iran war within 2 or 3 weeks. The White House says there's going to be an important update from him on Wednesday evening. Now, the president and his top aides are saying that he can claim to have achieved his main objectives. The president says that he has achieved his goal of dealing with Iran's nuclear program. But on the other hand, he's left open the potential for escalating military action, and US forces are continuing to travel to the region. Then there is Pakistan and China. Now, they've put forward a proposal to help end the war. They're calling for talks to start as soon as possible. So the question I'm asking myself, where are we right now? Could this war really be coming to an end, possibly in the coming weeks, possibly with the help of Pakistan and China? Or are what we're hearing from Trump, are his claims just an attempt to calm US citizens who are dealing with gas prices of more than $4 a gallon? OK, to talk about all of this, I'm going to bring in an expert. Her name is Dr. Rowena Binti Abdul Razak, and she's going to help me answer some of these questions. It's really great to have you with us. A bit about your background. You're a lecturer in the history of the Middle East and Africa at SOAS. And SOAS, just in case people aren't aware, is part of the University of London, and it's the only higher education institution in Europe that specialises, looks at the languages, cultures and societies of Asia, Africa and the Middle East. So thank you so much for joining us. I know that you're going to have lots of answers to all these questions that we've got. And I should say that for anyone watching us on our live streams on YouTube and TikTok, send us your questions. We really want to hear what you are thinking about, and I will put some of those questions to Rowena if I can. So, Rowena, I want to start by taking a quick listen to President Donald Trump, and then I'd love your response.
The meal shared by Jesus and his
disciples.
disciples.
That within 2 weeks, maybe 3. All I have to do is leave Iran, and we'll be doing that very soon. We'll be leaving very soon. 2 or 3 weeks.
Not 3 weeks. If it is,
we'll leave.
All right, so lots of talk about leaving. So, Rowena, does this sound believable? I mean, is the war going to end soon? What do you think?
Thank you so much, firstly, for having me and for that very kind introduction. Trump has said many things. It's possible that the war might end. I think it's in a lot of people's interests, including Iran's, that the war shouldn't last longer than another few months. I mean, I think we're all starting to feel the effects of it. Oil prices going up, basic daily life will increase in terms of prices and expenses. So I think everyone's starting to feel it. So it's in no one's interest for the war to continue. Trump has said many things about how long the war will last. I think just a few weeks ago, he was going to say it will take months. And even Iran has said that they are prepared for the war to last for a few more months. But now that he's put a deadline of about 2 to 3 weeks, it's very possible that he wants a solution or at least an end to the war quickly. I think he's been trying to look for an exit to this war for some time now. So if he's put a deadline of something like 2 to 3 weeks, I think it's likely that we will see a sort of end at some point.
So you're talking
having said
about
that, 2 to 3 weeks is still long, though. 2 to 3 weeks is still quite long.
That's right. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, things change from day to day here, don't they? I mean, we've been talking about, finding an off-ramp, finding ways of being able to potentially, if he wants to, exit. I wanted to ask you, I mean, what do you see this as being driven by? Is this driven by military realities, or is it, more domestic political needs? Because, as we keep mentioning, the midterm elections are getting closer in the US. The price of petrol, gas, is eye-wateringly high for American standards. What do you think is driving this?
It's a mix. There is the high military expenditure. Trump doesn't want to involve the US in anything long-term. I think this is quite clear. Even though he's sending troops in, this could be seen as a negotiating tool rather than a commitment to something military. Trump doesn't want a long-term commitment to the of the US in any kind of military engagement in the Gulf. I think that's quite clear. So I think it's a mix of rising military expenditure, not wanting to involve the US any longer than it has to, and also because of the domestic issues, but also global issues. I mean, with the Straits of Hormuz being quite limited in terms of what ships can go through, I think there's also a global impact that that I think needs to be considered here, and that the US doesn't necessarily want a continuation of that. So it's a mix. And of course, with the midterm elections, Trump himself is facing some legitimacy issues as well in his presidency. This war is not popular. I think even in the early days of the war, they were saying something like only 1 in 4 Americans don't want this war. So there is a domestic call for an end to all of this. There was just on the weekend, pro-democracy, anti-far right march that was happening in Washington and also in Europe. So we can see there's no global appetite for war, not just in the US, but everywhere really. It's only certain parts of certain politicians who want this war, but the general public does not. No one wants this.
Can you talk about because you mentioned that the money, the cost of war. I mean, this is really costing the US. I believe is it billions per day? I'm not quite sure, but the cost of this is mounting up again as we're seeing, Americans paying a lot at the pump. Are people aware, do you think, of quite how high the financial cost of this war is, let alone, obviously, the cost of, people's lives, energy prices, infrastructure, all the rest of it?
I'm sure you're right. I think a number that was being floated around a few weeks ago was $1 billion a day or something like this. So it's extraordinarily high. But it's also not just the financial cost; it's the environmental cost as well. I think that people are also being more aware of this. Is that with bombs being dropped, all kinds of emissions happening, the environmental cost of the war itself is actually staggeringly high, and with more consciousness about climate change as well, I think people are also considering this cost, not just the financial cost, but the cost of on the planet and in the immediate environment in the Gulf area and in the surrounding area. So I think this is also something that people are also considering.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the thing. And there's been a lot of talk, hasn't there, about whether this might, in the short term, it's bad bad for the environment because some countries are sort of jumping back to oil and coal. But in the long term, the question is, might this push countries to alternative sources of energy? That's a whole other topic. We could talk a long time about that. I wanted to talk about Trump's objectives for this conflict. So he's saying that he's achieved his main objectives. That's also something that his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has done. And I wanted to just listen to a clip of Rubio speaking, and then we can talk about it. So this is something that he posted on X, and he basically said, these are the clear objectives of the operation. You should write them down. The destruction of Iran's air force, the destruction of their navy, the severe diminishing of their missile launching capability, and the destruction of their factories. I think we can play that clip for you.
This operation, okay, and that's what this is, it's about very specific objectives. The president laid them out on the first night of the operation. I'll repeat them to you now because I hear a lot of talk about we don't know what the clear objectives are. Here they are. You should write them down. Number 1, the destruction of their air force. Number 2, the destruction of their navy. Number 3, the severe diminishing of their missile launching capability. And number 4, the destruction of their factories so they can't make more missiles and more drones to threaten us in the future. All of this so that they can never hide behind it to acquire a nuclear weapon. That was our objective from the beginning. That remains our objective now. We are on pace and, in fact, ahead of schedule on some of those things, and we are going to achieve those things in a number of weeks, not in a number of months. This operation, okay, and that's what this is.
All right, I think we're looping back there. There we go. So, Rowena, the question I have is, have these objectives changed over the past few weeks? I mean, there's no mention in what Rubio said of nuclear capabilities, for example. I mean, have these goalposts been shifted?
I think the goalposts have been shifting quite a bit. I mean, at the very beginning, there was also talk of regime change as being one of the objectives that Trump wanted to achieve, which to some extent he has, because with the taking out of Khamenei, and so there has been some sort of a leadership shift, and taking out of also Ali Larijani, the security chief, as well. So there's been some sort of a shift in the leadership, and I think that was one of the objectives he wanted, because he was looking for, quote unquote, the right people to negotiate with. So whether that really remains to be seen, whether negotiations will go ahead with China or Pakistan remains to be seen. But so that was one of the objectives as well. I just also wanted to mention, but that seems to have kind of dropped off the list, because the actual regime change that he was envisioning clearly hasn't happened. In terms of the sort of military or strategic objectives, I mean, we need to sort of see this within the longer, in the bigger picture. This campaign really has started back in 2020 when they killed Qasemi Soleimani, the IRGC, in the region. So they've been trying to weaken Iran regionally, and now they're just trying to weaken Iran itself. So we can see that in terms of longer term objectives, these objectives have actually been somewhat met. Iran is significantly weaker. It is, it is facing, in terms of domestic legitimacy, it also has some sort of issues, but in terms of its capabilities, it is weaker. But in terms of the nuclear objectives, it's quite interesting, because the US is actually returning back to the terms that Iran had originally put forward when they were negotiating over the nuclear terms. So it's quite interesting to see them kind of circle back and refocus this whole conflict on the nuclear issue. Whether Iran now wants to go back to the negotiating table, especially what's happened in the last few weeks, it's hard to sort of predict, and whether those kind of objectives will be met is also very hard to predict. But Mark Rubio saying that taking out the Navy, all these kind of military capabilities and so on, they've weakened Iran, but whether they're going to do that fully, I don't think that's possible. Iran is actually very, very strong as well, so it's quite hard to kind of take out everything.
Yeah. Rowena, I just wanted to, there's comments and questions flying into our chat here, and I just wanted to pull up a couple. Looking at our YouTube viewers, there's a question from @GDP Japan. What happens if the US pulls out of Iran and leaves the Strait of Hormuz unstable? Oil prices are global, but even without production changes, supply risk and disruption can still drive prices up. I mean, absolutely. That's just talking about the level of volatility that we've seen in oil prices and energy supply. And there's also a question here from Seiki Machan. The US can leave Iran any time as they want to, but the damage has already been done, including on the global economy. So that obviously is a huge part of all of this, isn't it? Whether Trump pulls out now or in 2 weeks, there has been an enormous amount of damage done already.
Definitely. The Strait of Hormuz, interestingly, it is somewhat open, and ships are going through, especially, and Iran has now imposed a kind of toll system where they're allowing certain ships to go in. They've allowed certain ships to go in. They're imposing quite high toll fees for other ships to go in. And they're using the Strait of Hormuz as their kind of bargaining chip for a lot of things, and which, obviously is going to continue to raise prices of oil, other supplies as well. We've got the fertilization crisis possibly on our hands as well. So there's a lot of other issues, not just the oil. So while this is continuing, the supply chain obviously is going to be affected, and so we're going to see a long-term global crisis still on our hands, even if the war were to end in 2 to 3 weeks. The damage has been done. But it's not just the global damage, but it's also the regional damage, which I'm quite interested in. I mean, with this war, the Gulf states have revealed themselves to be quite vulnerable. The relationship and the stability of the region is in question now. Iran, which used to have a fairly stable relationship with its neighbors, is going to have to rebuild that trust. It has attacked the UAE, Kuwait, as well as Qatar and even Oman. And these countries have tried to build a good relationship with Iran, but now that's very unstable. So it's quite unfortunate to see the region itself in crisis.
So do you see, is what you're saying, do you see that this leaves Iran in a weaker position than it was before, even though it is still there is still, we haven't seen the new leader, but there is apparently a new leader, and they are responding to Trump. Do you think, though, that Iran is now in a weaker position?
Iran's certainly more isolated than it was before. Domestically, it's quite interesting because the war has, on some level, brought quite a hardline stance to Iran, and it's capitalized on the war in terms of its domestic legitimacy. Before the war started, Iran was actually facing very dire, the regime was actually facing quite a dire legitimacy crisis. You know, there were just a few months ago in December, there were huge protests against the government. And this war has kind of given an opportunity for the country for the government at least, to kind of galvanize and have a strong hardline stance. So it's quite interesting in terms of what's happening domestically, because it's using it to kind of build its legitimacy basis back again. Whether this will work in the long term, again, it's hard to say. But in terms of an international stance, especially in terms of its regional relationships, it's very much isolated, which Iran will have a lot to do after the war. It's got to rebuild the trust with its Arab neighbors. It's got to kind of also rebuild trust if it wants to kind of have a working relationship with European governments and the US. It's got a lot to do also with the global, I think a lot of countries globally may understand why Iran is doing what it's doing, because it was attacked in the first place. But at the same time, everyone is feeling the effects of it. So even allies who may understand where Iran is coming from Iran will have to kind of rebuild this relationship with them. And that's going to take a long time.
I just wanted to ask you one question about Israel and where all of this leaves Israel. It certainly isn't making any suggestion that the conflict is going to be over anytime soon. The Israeli military saying that it's preparing for weeks more fighting. If the US were to withdraw now, how exposed would Israel be in potentially continuing this fight alone? I mean, can it sustain this sort of level of engagement without US involvement?
In terms of direct engagement with Iran itself, it can't really do much. Israel can send missiles launched from Israel itself, but that's very far. It's not possible to kind of have the same kind of impact without US involvement as we're seeing now, because most of the missiles that are going into Iran are being launched mainly from US bases in the Gulf. If the US were to pull out, if the US were to stop sending those missiles from its Gulf bases, then Israel is unlikely going to be sending any other kinds of missiles, or even troops. It's definitely out of the question, missiles to Iran from Israel. But what it will do is most likely continue attacks and engagement with Iran's local allies. So those, especially in Lebanon and possibly Syria. But I think Syria is not going to launch any kind of pro-Iran attacks on Israel at this point. But I think Israel will probably concentrate on Hezbollah, for example, most likely on Hezbollah in Lebanon, rather than Iran directly.
Just a final point, Rowena. We know that Trump's going to be making an announcement on Iran later today. What signals do you think we should be looking out for there in what he says, for what might give us some clues about what's going to happen next?
Besides a deadline, a new deadline, I most likely it would be the negotiations. I think I'd be very interested to hear what he has in terms of negotiations with Iran directly or via China and Pakistan, which seems quite plausible and likely. But we need to see if they're actually going to engage with Iran. So what does this end to the war actually mean? Does it mean just ending military engagement? Does it mean actual negotiations? Does it mean a return to the nuclear negotiations? I think that's what we should be looking for. We should be looking for concrete guidelines as to how this war will actually end. well, let's see. Trump can say so many things, and he might make statements that Iran is not aware of, as we've seen in the past. He said he was negotiating with Iran, and Iran said we're not even heard of this negotiations. So let's see if we're seeing something actually concrete materialize, and only then can we really predict a proper end to the war, which I'm sure all of us want.
Dr. Rowena Binti Abdul Razak from SOAS at the University of London. Rowena, thank you so much for your time. Really, really interesting to get your insights.
Thank you so much for having me.
And what Rowena was saying there about, the negotiations that are happening, we want to talk about that because there is a lot of stuff happening in the background. And while we're all guessing what President Trump is going to announce on Wednesday evening and whether the US might pull out of this conflict in a couple of weeks' time, Pakistan and China have been working together to create what they're calling a peace proposal to end this war. So we want to talk about why. Pakistan is emerging as the key mediator in this situation. It's been acting as a go-between. Tehran passed a response via Islamabad to President Trump's 15-point plan. That was something that he'd floated a couple of weeks ago. China, on the other hand, has quite a lot of influence in Tehran. It's Iran's top trade partner and the biggest importer of Iranian oil. And so it has a clear incentive to seek an end to this conflict. And then there's also a strategic dimension here because Iran has asked for guarantees in any deal with the US. And Pakistan's foreign minister just travelled to Beijing specifically to explore whether China would serve as a guarantor for a potential deal. Now, as I said, together they put forward a 5-point proposal to help end the war, which I think we can pull up. There we go. There's a tweet, or rather, excuse me, a post on X, which was by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Pakistan. And it's calling for talks to start as soon as possible. It's got 5 clear action points. So we're going to take a look at specifically what these 5 points are. So what they include is an immediate cessation of hostilities. So that includes access to humanitarian aid in areas affected by the war. Secondly, China and Pakistan are calling for peace talks to start as soon as possible. So that's suggesting that diplomacy here is the only viable option to resolve the conflict. And what's interesting here is that Pakistan and China use that point to stress that sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national independence need to be upheld by all parties involved, and that the warring parties should refrain from using threats during any peace talks. Number 3, the third point is the security of non-military targets. Now, that's specifically infrastructure, energy, and desalination facilities, which are really important in the Middle East. The US had been threatening to carry out attacks against targets like these in Iran. Number 4, China and Pakistan are also calling for the security of shipping lanes to be protected. That's basically about the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that is key for the global supply of oil from the Middle East, and that's basically been blocked by Iran since the early days of the war. What China and Pakistan are calling for, they want ships and crews stuck in that strait to be allowed safe passage out of there. The last point is respect for the United Nations Charter. Now, this is a call for all parties involved to stick to international law in resolving this conflict to realise lasting peace in the region. My colleague, who have we got now? Have we got my colleague Beenish Javed? That's right, my colleague Beenish Javed is joining me. We've got a couple of experts that we're going to be speaking to, but we've got you here first, Beenish. Thanks for being here. You're going to help me break some of this down. And what I really want to find out, first of all, is about specifically Pakistan's relations with China. Why does Pakistan want to work with Beijing on this peace initiative right now?
Anya, there are many reasons. First of all, we have to understand that Pakistan and China have a very close and strong relationship. I mean, both countries say that they have an all-weather strategic relationship. China has invested millions of dollars in infrastructure projects in Pakistan. It is the biggest weapons importer for Pakistan, so they have a very strong relationship. That's one part of the equation. But as we have already discussed, that China it's in the economic interest of China for this conflict to end, because China is also heavily reliant on Iranian oil. So it is also in its economic interest that this conflict ends. And when Pakistan, its very close friend, very close ally, is appearing as the main mediator or facilitator that can bring the US and Iran to the negotiating table. So in that scenario, of course, China wants to work with Pakistan. And as we have seen, they have put out this 5-point plan. And Anya, just before Pakistan's foreign minister went to China, one day before, Pakistan hosted foreign ministers of Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. And it was said that, this was considered as a profound step in bringing the US and Iran to the negotiating table. And immediately after that, just one day after that, Pakistan's foreign minister traveled to China, discussed all of this, which also shows China's open public willingness now to facilitate talks between US and Iran. And as our guest earlier said, that for the region, it's the economy, it's economic interests that are at play here, and they desperately want this conflict to end.
Absolutely. And we are going to talk about China specifically in a while. But Binish, if you could explain to us what Pakistan's interest is for itself in mediating between the US and Iran. Where's Pakistan coming from?
Again, I would say there are a couple of interests that Pakistan have. I cannot ignore this interest and desire of Pakistan to have a high, elevated diplomatic stature in the world, because everyone is now talking about Pakistan, a country that was isolated by Washington for years. I mean, nobody talked about Pakistan, but all of a sudden, Pakistan is appearing to be that country that can bring United States and Iran on the negotiating table. So Pakistan, I think, is also enjoying the limelight it's getting as being a facilitator, or as somebody who...
It was quite a surprise to some people, wasn't it, when Pakistan started being mentioned, the fact that it is playing such an important role.
And I think some things went in favor of Pakistan, of the location of Pakistan. Pakistan shares a 900-kilometer long border with Iran. So Pakistan has that, and Pakistan does not have hostilities with Iran. So it gave some edge to Pakistan to be able to talk to Iran. And then Pakistan has a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, which put Pakistan in a very odd position, because if Pakistan has to defend Saudi Arabia, which Iran was attacking, then it means that Pakistan becomes a party to the conflict, and then Iran and Pakistani hostilities could increase. So Pakistan absolutely wanted to avoid any scenario like that. And being a facilitator or a mediator is a very good excuse to Saudi Arabia that we are trying to resolve this conflict, so don't push us into the conflict. So a lot of things worked in favor of Pakistan, but I also think that on the ground, there are hard realities. Pakistan is struggling economically. It's still recovering from the 2023 economic crisis. 80% of Pakistan's energy needs come through Strait of Hormuz.
80%.
80%.
Right.
It's like a lifeline for Pakistan. And so there was a lot of panic in Pakistan and a lot of efforts. So that is also pushing Pakistani officials to immediately, to at least make an effort to stop this conflict, because on the ground, and not only Pakistan, South Asia, Bangladesh, India, all of these countries do depend a lot on the energy that transports through Strait of Hormuz. So if the conflict finally ends, it will be a big, big sigh of relief for millions of people who are being impacted by this war.
The reminder of the effect that all of this has on people, not only politics and governments. Thanks, everyone, for sending in your comments and your questions. They're really racing in here to the chat. I just wanted to mention one question from Tance Punk. Could the unfinished Iran Iran-Pakistan pipeline finally get completed? Is that something that's going to be affected by this?
That's a very technical question, and I think a lot of...
Keep it simple.
Yeah, a lot of it, the work on it stopped because of the US sanctions. Right. So many countries in the region stopped working with Iran because of US sanctions, and many projects were stalled because of those sanctions, and you never know what comes out of the US and Iran negotiations. If Iran asks something, for example, lifting of sanctions, then a lot of business activity, commercial activity can start with regional countries and Iran.
Binish, I want you to stay where you are. I want to shift the focus to China, and then I'll come right back to you, Binish. But we can bring in another expert now. His name is Ian Chong. He's an associate professor at the National University of Singapore. Really good to see you. Thank you so much for joining our conversation here. Your focus is on international relations, Chinese foreign policy, and international relations in the Asia-Pacific. So I have a feeling you're going to have a lot of answers for us. We want to talk about what role China is playing in all of this. Could you, Ian, give us, first of all, an overview of really why China is getting involved here and why it wants to bring this conflict to an end?
So the PRC, China, has several reasons to be involved. First of all, imports a lot of fossil fuels from the Middle East, a lot of which comes through the Strait of Hormuz. Something like between a fifth to a quarter of its oil and gas comes from the region. About 12% or 13% comes from Iran. So based on that, the disruption to the fossil fuels puts strain on the PRC. Plus, with the rising oil prices, it puts a damper on China's already slow-growing economy. So certainly they want to see that go away. The other is we need to remember that the PRC, Beijing, has tried really hard to become a major player globally, but especially in the Middle East. It brokered the rapprochement between Tehran and Saudi Arabia. It brought the different Palestinian factions together. It wants to be a player. So to the extent that it's comprehensive strategic partner, Iran was being attacked, also a big importer of Chinese arms. China is Iran's largest trading partner. The fact that the PRC looked like it wasn't doing anything could make it seem somewhat weak. It could make its claims to sort of want to help out with the global south ring somewhat hollow. So Beijing wants to seem active. It wants to show that it has some moves it can play, that it is important. And globally, positions Beijing to be in a leadership position to be active in the region now.
OK. We've talked just a few moments ago about the 5-point plan that was presented by China and Pakistan. I think we can probably pull that up again for our viewers. It was posted by the Pakistani Foreign Office. And I wanted to ask you specifically about point 4, which is about the safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Do you think that is, the main Chinese interest here, or are there other points in this plan that you think China would have had sort of specific influence on?
So I think actually all of these points would have Beijing's imprint. But you're right that in strict material terms, the shipping lanes are important. It gets to China's immediate needs, right? I talked about its oil and gas needs, talked about oil and gas prices. But that aside, Beijing has been talking up its push for the UN Charter. There are discrepancies in Beijing's position on that, but it likes to talk it up in terms of being a force for peace and stability. Over the past several years, and especially since the second Trump administration, Beijing's trying to emphasize that it is this sort of bastion of stability. That's how it's trying to sell itself to the world. So all the 5 points actually have Beijing's imprint, although I can see how the 4th point, the shipping, has a very immediate material concern.
OK. I just wanted to bring in a couple of comments, this time from our TikTok viewers who are watching the live stream on TikTok. We've got Hans Kreinhagen saying that Trump deals in outcomes, whereas Europe, with leaders like Starmer, prefers statements over consequences. And then Ibrahim Babagana says, since this was started, European nations have failed to condemn Trump. Only Spain did that. So some pretty strong opinions there. about the way that Trump is managing this. But back to the focus on China and Pakistan. China has lots of oil reserves, doesn't it? So it's not as affected by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, but its supply chain for its businesses is affected by higher oil prices and reduced supply, isn't it? So is that really having an impact on how China is positioning itself here?
So yes, its supply chains with the shipping it certainly is affected, but it's not just the Strait of Hormuz. We also have to look at the Houthis talking about attacking shipping in the Red Sea. Now that actually is probably more crucial for PRC supply chains. How its goods get exported to Europe, the Middle East, it goes through the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal. So as we've seen the Houthi attacks on shipping there before, that really created disruptions. I think Beijing is also keen to avoid that kind of a situation repeat itself.
Sorry, Venus just wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to quote this report by CNN. CNN has spoken to a Pakistani source, and they say that we all know that Iran, Pakistan's foreign minister also tweeted that Iran will allow 20 ships as a goodwill gesture for Pakistan's efforts towards peace, to allow 20 ships to pass through Strait of Hormuz. And CNN is reporting that Pakistan may allow some of the Chinese ships using Pakistani flags to pass through Strait of Hormuz. So that relationship is also, I mean, it's CNN report, but they have spoken to Pakistani official sources.
Okay, so we've got the sort of the intertwining of all of that now. Ian, I wanted to ask you, President Trump obviously is planning a visit to China in May to talk trade. Do you think it would help Trump to get this conflict done and over with by the time he meets with Xi Jinping?
So I think it depends on the terms on which the conflict ceases. So if somehow the conflict ends and the U.S. has some sort of upper hand, I think that could give Trump a lot more leverage. But if the conflict ends in a way that is inconclusive, or it seems that the U.S. has somehow lost out and China has gained, in that case, I think the tables will be flipped. We'll see Xi Jinping potentially having a lot more leverage on Trump. So it's not just the conflict ending, it's how it ends that matters.
All right, just one final question. So just generally, what is this doing for China's standing on the global stage? I mean, what image is it trying to portray here by its involvement with Pakistan and with this peace plan?
So that's a really interesting point. I think Beijing has got a lot of traction for this claim about being a bastion of stability, especially in contrast to the US and its current very unpredictable behavior. That having been said, I guess people will be looking for results. If Beijing, together with Islamabad, doesn't produce results, then that could raise questions about whether Beijing is ready and able to step up. And also the fact that, earlier on when Iran first got under attack, Beijing being a close partner of Iran didn't do very much, right? So that also casts a shadow. I think Beijing is trying to demonstrate that it is clawing back some of that credibility. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, but there are opportunities for Beijing to gain.
Professor Ian Chong from the National University of Singapore, thank you so much for your insights. Really great to talk to you today.
My pleasure.
Venus, you're still here. He was just talking about results, wasn't he? So what is going to come out of this? I mean, a question I had is that what are the chances that, the US and Iran are really going to take notice of this peace plan and act on it? I mean, is it all talk and no action?
Anya, that's a very difficult question to answer.
Sorry to ask you.
What will happen? But I think if we look at the statements that are coming out, so we know that Donald Trump is now saying that it may take 2 to 3 weeks, another 2 to 3 weeks, and the war will continue. We still see a lot of defiance from Iran. Abbas Agarchi, the Iranian foreign minister, in an interview to Al Jazeera has said that Iran can fight for next 6 months. But at the same time, he did say that now Iran has received messages from Steve Witkoff through intermediaries. He didn't name, but through intermediaries. And of course, we know it's Pakistan, Turkey or Egypt. So I think there is some some hope, but we have to be very careful because you never know what happens. But on the ground, we do see some activity happening. China is now involved. So it's possible that at least, I would say that even if the two can come to the negotiating table, that would already be a very big step.
Okay. And this, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because we hear that Trump is saying we're speaking directly to Iran and they really want a deal. And Iran is saying, no, we're not talking at all. And, you know, just a very quick question about how this diplomacy actually works, because it is quite a complicated sort of net of intermediaries, speaking to intermediaries and passing the messages back.
And I think publicly, they're like, you know, they want to, both sides obviously want to appear as very strong, or they are winning the war. It's, I think, standard. Every country that gets into the conflict, they want to be they would never accept that they are on a back foot or they are being defeated. They would always say. So I think public posture, of course, is different, but inside what's happening, and I think a lot, as we see that a lot of countries are now involved, including Pakistan. So we may be hearing maybe something good soon.
That's probably a good point to stop, isn't it? I just wanted to bring up a couple of comments from our TikTok viewers here. You were speaking about power, Beanish. Hans Kayan again is saying in geopolitics, paper doesn't stop missiles, power does. And Dees is saying there has to be a global bloc that condemns the main antagonists of the war. I
think what is interesting is that in the China-Pakistan points, they talk about UN Charter. So they want that UN, because we see that that there's the power of, or the authority of the UN is now questioned. And that, I think, they want this UN body to be strong, to be able to take decisions or to even mediate. Now we see individual countries mediating, but the United Nations as a body, I think that there's a push that body needs to be strengthened.
And step up.
Yes.
Beanish Javed, our Pakistan expert, DW reporter. Beanish, it's really great to talk to you. Thank you. We just want to give you a quick reminder of the latest developments in the US-Israeli war against Iran. There are so many aspects to this, but here are a couple of the points that we've been talking about today. The president of the US, Donald Trump, has said that the war with Iran could be over in 2 to 3 weeks and that he is prepared to leave whether there is a deal or not. The president is going to make an address to the American people from the Oval Office on Wednesday evening. Now, that'll be the first time since the start of the war. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said that when the war is over, Washington will have to re-examine its relationship with NATO. He's accusing Europe of not supporting the US and, quote, denying US basic rights. And as we've just been talking about, China and Pakistan have put forward a new 5-point peace plan for ending the conflict. Pakistan's foreign minister visited Beijing on Tuesday to discuss the proposal. And that brings you up to date. Thanks so much for joining us on this DW news stream. Thank you for your questions and your comments. Really great to have you with us. See you soon.